Hey, how's it going, everyone? So for today I got a 1970 El Camino Dragster with a 9-inch forward rear axle. We got an axle seal leak. The telltale sign of it being an axle seal leak is we can see that it's nice and wet all in the rotor here, and we have a pretty consistent spray pattern along the entire wheel. This particular axle's a 9 1/4 that it's a 35 spline, so it's not a factory Ford unit. It has the seals on the end of the axle tubes in here. So to replace this seal, we're gonna have to remove the wheel and tire, remove the brakes. The axle shaft will come off and it unbolts with these 4 bolts, and then we can get to the seal and it hammers in. So we'll do a time lapse and watch that go through. So this is my buddy Kyle's car that he graciously allowed me to film this seal on, and he's the one doing the work. He's been working on this 70 El Camino for a while in multiple driveways trying to get it to work, and the workmanship shows with giant holes in the interior, rust all over everything, rear brakes that don't work, and lights that only function if you bang on the switch. All joking aside, he's worked really hard on this car and it's come a long way from where it was. The one thing with dealing with anything that is a custom job like this is the Ford 9-inch rear axle is not factory, nor are the brakes. So having to get everything to work is a bit difficult. All the brackets are aftermarket, and actually removing the axle shaft is fairly difficult on this. There's a bit of an interference fit. So one of the things that we have to end up doing, as I show him here, is I use the brake rotor as a slide hammer to remove the axle shaft. All right, so we have the axle shaft out so we can gain access to the seal. The seal's recessed into the end of the housing right here. There's a couple different ways that we can remove it. We can either use a hook tool. We do run the risk of scoring the edge. You can get a hooked end on a slide hammer, which usually works pretty nice. The other trick is to use a self-tapping screw and a slide hammer to pull this out, which is more than likely the way that we're gonna do that. We'll then need to just clean everything up, install a new seal, and then we can reinstall everything in the reverse order. And yes, this is a race car, so there's holes straight to the interior. All right, so here's our new seal. There's a couple different sealing surfaces on this. Our first is going to be the lip seal with our garter spring. That's going to go around the axle shaft. This is a dynamic seal, so as the axle shaft turns, the garter spring keeps tension on it. Usually it's a good idea to put a little bit of grease around that to prevent the garter spring from falling off when we install it, and when we install the new axle, or the axle shaft back into it. The other sealing surface is going to be this red part. Now this red sealant is supposed to seal any little small imperfections inside of the differential housing. I've seen a lot of technicians cover these in silicone. That's not always a great idea because the silicone can get around the lip seal. But what we'll do is we'll just put a little bit of grease on it.
Right there?
No, around the garter spring. There you go. And what the grease will do is that will hold it in. And then we've just found a tool that's the right size, that's gonna, we'll be able to hit against the outer edge of it and be able to install it. So we'll do that now. Yep, go for it. All right, so there was that audible noise change when we were hammering. That's usually a good indication that we've seated the seal all the way in, and you can see some of the red sealant has come off, so that should seal it against the housing nicely. The only other thing you can try to do, and it's not always that easy, sometimes you have to use a small mirror, is to get in and make sure the garter spring's still in there. So the next step is going to be just to wipe everything down again one last time, reinstall the axle shaft and the brakes, and then we can test drive it. So Kyle's going through and using a rubber mallet to tap in the axle shaft into the rear differential side gears. The splines have a slight interference fit, and it's acceptable to hit those with a rubber mallet to install it. He's now going through and reinstalling all of the bracketry that supports the brake calipers and brake lines back in the reverse order that he removed it. He's taking care too to make sure that everything that he's put back on the vehicle is thoroughly clean, especially the brake rotor itself. The pads need a little bit of a scuff with some Scotch-Brite to get the gear oil off of it. Normally, vehicles would have a parking brake that could be located inside of the hat of the rotor. In this case, we don't have that. There's no parking brake for this particular vehicle. The parking brake is a cinder block behind the vehicle, and hopefully it won't roll away. So after he's cleaned everything, we'll go back through, reinstall the rear tire and torque it to spec, which we're just guesstimating is about 90 foot-pounds on this particular vehicle. All right, so we got wheel and tire back installed, all the brakes back installed. Now one of the things to note with this is we did have to go through and we cleaned the rotors the best we could. When they leak oil real bad like that, it can impregnate into the rotor. We're gonna try to run it and see if it works. To be perfectly honest with you, this thing's quite a project and the brakes don't really work to begin with. So now all Kyle needs to do is to test drive it.